What if I told you that poverty in many countries isn't entirely about what's happening outside their borders, but rather about who controls the system inside? Welcome to This Explainer. We constantly hear about how poverty is caused by external forces, right? Colonial history, global trade systems, international debt. And yeah, those absolutely matter. But they really don't tell the whole story. Because even when massive wealth flows into a country through oil, minerals, or foreign investment, it doesn't just automatically reach the population. A lot of the time, it gets captured. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating dynamic. We're going to look at exactly how a small group, a political elite, manages to lock down a nation's system, and why bringing wealth into a country is really only half the battle. Okay, let's dive into this massive contradiction that is playing out right now across the globe. Picture this. On one side, we have nations literally sitting on staggering amounts of natural wealth. We're talking about the exact resources that power our entire modern global economy. Yet, on the flip side, huge portions of their populations are living in deep, grinding poverty. It's a glaring, almost unbelievable disconnect. You've got the exact same country, but two completely different realities living side by side.
Which naturally leads us to the central mystery of this explainer. Where is the money going? Seriously, think about it. If a country is generating billions, with a B, of dollars in revenue, and everyday citizens aren't seeing better schools, paved roads, or even reliable electricity, well, those billions are flowing somewhere. They haven't just vanished into thin air. The wealth is entering the country for sure, but it's hitting a massive internal bottleneck.
And that bottleneck actually has a name. It's called elite capture. This is the diagnostic answer to our mystery. Economists use this term to describe what happens when political power and economic value are totally concentrated by a small group. It effectively blocks the wealth from ever circulating to the broader population. It's an incredible, albeit tragic, mechanism. The wealth enters the country, but instead of trickling down or feeding a healthy economy, it just gets sucked straight to the very top. It's literally captured before it can do any good for the public.
Section 1. Resource Control, the bottleneck of wealth.
Let's look at how this actually plays out in the real world. Natural resources, like oil and minerals, are basically the ultimate test of a country's internal structure. In theory, countries rich in these strategic resources should absolutely be among the most prosperous on Earth. But because these resources act as a massive, centralized revenue stream, they become the #1 target for elite capture. They are the ultimate bottleneck. Let's anchor this with a real-world example. Nigeria. Nigeria is an absolute economic powerhouse when it comes to production, pulling in hundreds of billions of dollars from massive oil reserves. Yet, despite this staggering influx of wealth over the decades, millions of Nigerians still lack basic, reliable electricity. How is that even mathematically possible? It happens because natural wealth does not guarantee shared prosperity. The resource is abundant, sure, but the control over it is incredibly tight.
So exactly how does this wealth bypass the public? Well, here is the playbook. Step 1, the oil revenue is generated. Step 2, rather than going into some transparent national treasury to fund public works, it flows directly through deeply entrenched political networks, highly lucrative contracts, and shady patronage systems. And then step 3, this results in severely limited public distribution. The money is actively diverted to sustain a political machine rather than being invested in the actual country's future.
Now, keep in mind, elite capture doesn't always look the exact same everywhere. We just talked about Nigeria, where the bottleneck is a relatively centralized network of political elites controlling the oil. But contrast that with the Democratic Republic of Congo. Over there, the resource is minerals, but the bottleneck is highly fragmented. You've got political elites, armed rebel groups, and massive foreign companies all fiercely competing to extract value. It's a very different structure of capture, way more chaotic than centralized. But the end result for the everyday citizen? Equally devastating.
And the irony of the situation in the DRC is just absolutely profound. The minerals being extracted there, things like cobalt, copper, coltan, they are the literal lifeblood of our modern technological world. They're critical for the electric vehicles we drive and the smartphones you might literally be holding in your hand right now. The DRC is fueling the global tech revolution, yet it remains one of the poorest nations on the planet. The wealth generated by their own Earth completely bypasses the citizens who actually live on top of it.
Section 2. Beyond simple corruption. Systems and incentives.
Now, right about here, it's incredibly tempting to just throw our hands up and say, well, it's just corruption. But I want us to completely reframe our understanding here. It is way too simple to just blame individual greed. This is not just about a few bad apple politicians stealing money from a vault. This is about deep, structural systems and incentives that actively reward extraction over development. Let's walk through the systemic loop that keeps this whole thing in place. For these political elites, survival isn't based on winning over the masses with great policies. Nope, it's based on this cycle. Step 1, secure power. Step 2, immediately seize control of the lucrative resources. Step 3, distribute the benefits of those resources exclusively to a tight inner circle of loyal insiders, military leaders, and key allies. In this kind of system, building independent, strong public institutions is actually a threat to their power. Their political survival literally depends on keeping the circle small and making sure the money flows only to the right insiders.
If you visit some of these countries, you won't just see poverty. You will often see explosive, visible growth. I'm talking massive stadiums, luxury airports, gleaming mega projects. But right next door, you'll find underfunded schools and incredibly fragile healthcare systems. Why? Well, prestige mega projects are highly visible, right? They generate fantastic press headlines, and crucially, they involve massive contracts that are super easy to hand out to loyal allies. Building a functioning, nationwide rural healthcare system, that's hard. That requires real institution building, and it doesn't offer the same easy payouts. We have to remember, visible growth does not equal inclusive development.
So how do they keep getting away with it? It really comes down to a massive accountability gap. Think about a traditional tax-based system. A government has to extract revenue directly from its citizens. And when you take people's hard-earned money, you better believe they demand to know what you're doing with it. The government is literally forced to be accountable to the public. But in a resource-based system, the government gets its billions directly from the ground or from foreign mining companies. They completely bypass the citizen. And when governments don't rely on their citizens for revenue, they no longer have to answer to them. That vital link of accountability is entirely severed.
Section 3. The Global Wealth Escape.
Because here's the thing, this internal issue doesn't just stay internal. The political elite are not operating in a vacuum. This internal capture is intimately connected to a much broader global system, which leads us to the totally devastating concept of capital flight. The wealth doesn't just concentrate at the top inside the struggling country. It frequently leaves the country entirely. We can track this extracted wealth as it flows straight into offshore bank accounts, gets parked in luxury foreign real estate in places like London or New York, and gets washed right through international financial systems. The elite externalize their wealth to protect it. So the host country isn't just dealing with inequality, it is actively being drained of the exact capital it desperately needs to develop.
Let's just pause for a second and let this sink in. The issue is not that these countries lack wealth. It is that the wealth is captured before it can ever reach the population. It's a fundamental shift in how we need to look at global poverty. The problem is not just how much wealth exists, but who controls it. It's not always a crisis of scarcity. It is very often a crisis of control.
And this idea beautifully summarizes our core thesis. Development depends on distribution, not just production. You can pump millions of barrels of oil. You can mine thousands of tons of copper. You can literally have off-the-charts production metrics. But if the system isn't structurally designed to distribute that value back into education, infrastructure, and the general economy, true national development will simply never happen.
Section 4. Synthesizing the system.
Let's bring all of this together and synthesize the system. How do internal governance and external forces actually interact? Well, here's the sobering reality. As we've explored in other parts of this explainer series, looking at resources in Chapter 4, trade in Chapter 5, and debt in Chapter 6, we can spend decades fighting to improve global systems. We can make international trade rules completely fair. We can even forgive all foreign debt for these developing nations. And yes, those are absolutely noble and necessary goals. But if the internal structures of elite capture remain unbroken, the outcome won't change. Even when external conditions improve, internal structures can still block development. The new wealth generated by fair trade or debt relief will simply be absorbed by the exact same elite bottleneck. Fixing the outside doesn't automatically fix the inside.
Which leaves us with this final, lingering thought. The next time you look at a nation that is incredibly rich in natural resources, but whose people are still struggling to survive, stop asking, why are they still poor? We know why. Instead, we need to ask the much harder, much more revealing question. Who controls the wealth? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope it gave you a powerful new lens to view the world through. Because ultimately, when wealth is captured by a few, growth becomes visible, but development never reaches the many.